I am David Scaer, and I am teaching in the area of biblical and dogmatic theology here at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne. And we're looking at the appointed gospel for the 24th Sunday after Pentecost, found in Mark, verses 38 to 44. Those of you who are participating in this study of the Gospels are following the 3-year series, which has pretty well become widely accepted in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, and it is also accepted, different forms of it are accepted in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and the Roman Catholic Church. And the 3-year series, as you have already discovered, allows for a greater appreciation of the literary and the theological contribution of each evangelist. And I don't know which is the most easiest or the most difficult gospel to preach. Lutherans following Luther, like John and Matthew, may come in second, and perhaps Mark comes in last. It does have a ring of authenticity in two regards. Its kind of cluttered effect may resemble the way Jesus himself taught. And if Mark contains the remembrances of Peter, at least that's what the ancient Father Papias thought, that everything was not all that well organized in the preaching of Peter, or maybe in how Mark took them down. But there is a rhyme and a reason for how things were done. And so we will look at there are 2 episodes. There are, just like in last Sunday, there are 2 episodes. The one episode is the complete commitment of the believer to God, and the second subsidiary one is that if even the Old Testament recognized the divine significance of David's son. And so in this Sunday for the pericope, there is one part of the pericope, verses 38 to 40, speaks about how people who are ostentatious sometimes cover up their own beggarly attitude, their own greed. And the second part of the sermon is related to it. It has to do with if the rich do not give everything which they should for the support of the church, so the poor give way above their means when it comes to percentages. You may have already purchased from Concordia Publishing House recent volumes in the American edition of Luther Works. And I have found them to be absolutely fascinating in getting into the reformer's mind. And Luther begins a sermon like this. This sermon, I hate to say it, he says, is not going to be a very pleasant sermon because he's going to speak about greed. So this sermon, I think the idea of having a stewardship Sunday, which was very prevalent, at least when I began in the ministry, you set aside a particular Sunday in order to get the saints of God to support the work of the church. Where I was a vicar, we had 4 of those. We had 4 stewardship Sundays. I believe they were in November. That's almost a typical thing. I don't know if a steward setting aside a particular Sunday to do that kind of a thing, this has that much value. I think it does, in the sense that the church, after all, is a business and has to know. It has a payroll, And if you have a payroll, you have to have some source of income. It's not an issue that can be avoided. So at least standing in the step-foots of the great reformer Martin Luther himself, we might say that this sermon should be, this is not going to be a very nice sermon. What was the surprise? Among the commandments, Luther sees greed, that would be thou shalt not steal. Luther sees greed as absolutely unnatural. He says a lot of other things we do it simply because we are sinners. He says greed, we really have to think about it, how we are going to get more money and how we are going to keep money. And the first part of this pericope, which we'll read in English, 38 to 40, speaks about this. And in his teaching, he said, now, when it says in his teaching, this kind of lends to the idea, yes, in the Greek it's even it's more obvious. It says en te didache, in his teaching, which kind of indicates that Jesus did this frequently. In his teaching, the word didache suggests that the teaching of Jesus has become solidified almost into a recognizable form that was passed on. And it certainly fits Mark does not have the Sermon on the Mount. But Matthew begins the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the poor in spirit, and Luke has blessed are the poor, period. And that's a very prominent theme in the preaching of Jesus. Now, as I said, this is not going to be a pleasant sermon. Do you say in your sermon that $20 a Sunday doesn't do the trick? Do we want to get down to the nitty-gritty? That if the people want a church, they're going to have to support it? Well, Jesus seems to be works on this level. He's going against this. By the way, in Matthew, it's much more severe, which is not surprising. It's kind of weak in Mark, not as long. Jesus says, verse 38 to 40, in his teaching he said, beware of the scribes who like to go about in long robes and to have salutations in the marketplaces and the best seat in the synagogues and the place of honor at the feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers that they may receive the greater condemnation. I just love this. That is, on this point, Luther uses this kind of a pericope to go after the elaborate robes of the monks and how the robe of the monk was the distinguishing factor, and that this created a certain bit of competition among the monasteries. They go about in long robes and to have salutations in marketplaces. Now, how are you going to take this? Well, very few of our people are scribes, but the rich like to be addressed. I'm always suspicious when I'm with another clergy person and we go to a restaurant and the head waiter or the person who takes you to your table knows who the person is and greets him with wonderful salutations. The rich love this type to be greeted, to be recognized. And they have the best seats in the synagogues. Well, if you've been brought up in a Jewish community, you know that the Jews may not necessarily be in the synagogue on a regular basis. Their attendance in synagogue is much worse than we Christians in our churches. But if they're going to be there for the high holy days of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and they're going to be there, they buy a pew for the entire year. They want the best seats in the synagogues. Things have not changed. And that's the way it is in many churches too. And it says, as they are doing that, and they have the money to do it. I mean, in some of these places, these seats might cost thousands of dollars, $10,000, $20,000. to go to church and have a place where you will be seen and you will be greeted. And then he says it's all fiction. He says they devour widows' houses. I can see that if Luther said that I'm not going to preach a very nice sermon, Jesus could have taken upon himself to say he also was not going to have a very nice sermon. Now, there are a number of points that have to be brought up here, and that is, you know more than I know that weddings are. This is not just rich people who are, let's say, well off. You know, at weddings, I'm not a pastor at the present time, but most of you, if not all of you, are. And you know one of the real problems is when it comes to taking a photograph of the family, where do people stand? Undoubtedly, the most important people are closest to the bride and groom. What do you do when the bride and groom's parents are divorced? Instead of having 4 sets of parents, four people, you have 8. And many a reception has come to great sadness and confusion because the people are not placed at the right table. We all know that where you are asked to sit says a lot about who you are. And so this is Luther said, you know, you're not going to like what I have to say here, but he felt compelled to say it. They like the best seats of all. Everybody does. And then he says here, if you want to look at the Greek, it says, they devour the houses of widows. Now, this is absolutely brilliant. This is the way this is worded. There is no other better way of saying that, and that's in verse 40. In verse 40, because it doesn't say they eat the house of. They devour. If you look at the Greek, it says kat estheontes. Estheontes means to eat. Katetheon means they chew it they grab it with their teeth like with fangs. They rip it apart. And I guess it has to be a reference here now to the commandment, thou shalt not steal. Yeah, who was that fellow in New York, Bernie? He's now in prison for the rest of his life because he took the IRAs, the retirement accounts of the money. Those people had money. This shows absolutely no mercy. They'll take money from anybody just to increase their wealth. And the sermon maybe on greed is necessary as a kind of a substitute for a sermon on stewardship. This is about money. There's no way to get around it. Now, in an antithetical relationship to the rich people who take other people's money, let's go back to this other thing. Everything in this world is ephemeral. It passes. So as long as you're the chairman of the board, the chief pastor, the academic dean, the president, whatever position you hold on the city council, people will be admiring you. And they're only admiring you not because of who you are, but what they can do for use. They hold all the cards. But when the cards are taken away, then each of us is demoted to close to being nothing. And then, of course, the pericope ends up with a gal, a woman, a widow, who has absolutely nothing. Now, the connection might be that she has nothing because whatever possession she had, she's been swindled out of them by rich religious people. And so it says in verse 41 that Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the multitude putting money into the treasury. And many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who were contributing to the treasury. For they contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, her whole living." Here again, Mark is a little bit more descriptive than Matthew. It actually tells us where Jesus was. And he found a place to sit down and watch things. I probably am a lot like many of you, if not most of you, that we're people watchers. We like to watch people just to see what kind of persons they are. And a lot of the times we can tell. So if Jesus was sitting down in a niche of the temple, kind of an amazing thing, he who was the temple of God himself was sitting in the temple, completely unrecognizable of who he really was. And he was watching people come up to put their money into a box, which was their offering. And some people did it with they were very ostentatious about it, so that the people watching would be impressed by how generous they are. And then he doesn't commend the rich person, he commends this widow. And the language here is significant because it says that she gave out of her poverty. She gave, it was a complete dedication of the self. Now, it might be a stretch to say that this is the description, this is a description of faith. But more so, it's a description of God, who in giving Christ gave everything which he was. There was nothing which he held back. And so in the impoverishment of the widow is reflected the impoverishment of God in Jesus Christ in coming to our aid. Many of you have traveled in foreign countries. Well, in Europe, as you know, there's only one form of money. It's the euro. And in other countries, you come back with coins. You might donate it on the flight back. The flight attendants come through and pick them up. Those little coins are chump change. They have absolutely no value at all. Or if they do have a value, it can't be calculated. Now, in the ancient world, there was no middle class. We cannot impose our way of looking upon reality upon people in the rest of the world. People in the rest of the world have absolutely nothing at all, very little. And the coins that they have in their hand cannot be even exchanged into dollars and cents. It doesn't even, her money doesn't even come on the chart. But Jesus commends her that she gave totally of herself. This is the total commitment of faith. I don't know how any person can avoid not giving some kind of stewardship sermon without using that word. That word is kind of tainted. Some kind of steward. And if somebody feels bad, see, Luther Luther said, you're going to hear a very unpleasant sermon, because Luther knew that whatever he said, he was going to offend some people. So it may be a good idea to give people a warning that you're going to say what some people think is offensive. However, our condition before God is offensive, and nobody is exempt, whether they are rich or poor. Thank you very much. I've appreciated that you've let me explain certain things.